welcome. I'm Melinda Kimami. Tonight, President Buhari's leadership of the anti-corruption fight in Africa received the commendation of delegates at the 30th Ordinary Session of the AU as it comes to an end in Addis Ababa. Tributes as the body of Nigeria's former Vice President, Dr. Alex Ekweme, arrives in Nigeria for its final journey home. Senate begins probe into oil subsidy payment as NNPC says it received almost 5 trillion naira between 2006 and 2015 for that purpose. And Russia accuses the United States of meddling in their election as US gets set to release report on Kremlin-linked leaders.
On Business News tonight, U.S. Consul General visits Nigeria's stock exchange, pledges commitment to development of stronger business partnership with private sector.
On sports news, Spanish club Malaga signed Super Eagles forward Brownie Day on loan in a bid to survive relegation from the La Liga.
And from Abuja, suspected cattle rustlers kill over 70 cows and abduct 2 persons in Nasarawa State as a policeman narrates ordeal following an attack by suspected herdsmen in Benue State.
Tonight in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where the 30th edition of the AU Summit for Heads of States and Government has ended with a call for collaboration with private sector in developing Africa. The new AU chairman and Rwandan president, Mr. Paul Kagame, who spoke at the closing ceremony, thanked all the participants for what he calls a successful summit. Earlier, Mr. Kagame formally launched the single African air transport market and said it will hold a great potential for the continent. Our correspondent Ibrahim Adra tells us more.
Appreciation. For 8 days, the AU headquarters was literally a beehive of activities. Heads of state and governments discussed several issues concerning Africa and Africans. This brief ceremony means it is time to go. Before departure, however, the new chairperson of the AU takes the podium to make a case.
As we go forward, I would encourage closer collaboration with Africa's private sector on the Union's key initiatives. The business community is always eager to get involved, and more importantly, they are critical partners.
He did not say what agreements were reached, but promises that it's work in progress.
We had the opportunity before the summit to hold a conclusive and positive reform meeting, and we will continue consulting as the process unfolds.
As the delegates depart, they will carry the joy of accomplishing a major feat, the official launch of the single African air transport market. The event held earlier in the day and is set to hold many benefits for air travels in Africa.
Well, the single African air transport market means that there would be more aviation activities within the continent of Africa. It will be more free, and it will, of course, bring down cost of ticket. It will increase movement of persons because air transportation connects businesses.
Mr. Sirika also gave insight into government's plan to own its own national carrier.
The establishment of national carrier in Nigeria, national, of course, with the coloration, because it's going to be full or wholly private sector led and driven.
There is no substitute for engagement, but there are voices in that summit as well as elsewhere who would like to see African leaders walk more and talk less in matters that concern harnessing the potentials of the continent for the benefit of its people. From Addis Ababa, capital of Ethiopia, Ibrahim Adra reporting for Channels Television News.
And with President Muhammadu Buhari leading Africa's quest to tackle corruption, there are high hopes that he could make a big difference. Delegates at the AU summit applauded the emergence of the Nigerian president as the driving force behind the effort and asked other leaders to support him.
I pledge that I shall do my very best to ensure that the anti-corruption agenda will receive the attention it deserves.
President Muhammadu Buhari taking on a new challenge at the continental level to spearhead Africa's fight against corruption.
Thank you.
It's a role some delegates to the 30th AU Summit believe President Muhammadu Buhari will succeed in.
South Sudan would like to learn from the experience and the roadmap laid by His Excellency President Buhari to fight the corruption in Africa. And corruptions deny opportunity for children to go to schools, deny opportunity to build schools, deny opportunity for us Africans to connect ourselves, deny opportunity for food security in Africa.
I'm sure that he's the person who can really take that responsibility and fight against corruption and show to the rest of Africa the way.
Nigeria's Minister of Justice sees the appointment of Nigeria to lead the fight as an acknowledgement.
It is indeed a very well-deserved commendation, very well-deserved appointment for the international community and indeed the African countries, the African leadership, heads of states and government to acknowledge what Mr. President is doing. And I think the essence is for them to drive from the wisdom that has been put in place by the President in terms of fighting, the fight against corruption.
The acting chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Mr. Ibrahim Magu, believes that the fight requires political will and must be fought by all.
Fighting corruption is not a one-man business. Every Nigerian should follow us, should join in the fight against corruption. You don't have to fight corruption the way I do. Everybody has a style of fighting corruption. Even if you have to educate children at home that corruption is wrong, corruption is evil, it goes a long way.
In his speech at the launch, President Buhari calls for an independent judiciary, strong institutions, and to bring the youth on board.
Now let's get more insight into some of the resolutions at the 30th Ordinary Session of the African Union Summit. And joining me now to discuss this is an economist and the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf. You're welcome to the news at 10.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Now, from the figures coming out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, African leaders appear to be charting a new course for the continent. What's your take on that?
I think it's a good development. But the worry has been that there is always a gap between what they say and what they do.
If they could walk the talk.
Yes, that has been a major issue. Now, one big issue that was discussed has to do with the issue of the continental free trade area, which is about economic integration on the African continent. The beauty of economic integration lies in the market size that it creates. You have a market size of over 1 billion people. That is big. And the advantage that that brings to an economy or to businesses in the continent is the advantage of economies of scale. When you have access to a big market, you are able to produce on a large scale, you enjoy economies of scale, it drives down your unit cost, and you become more competitive. That is the spirit of the economic integration. And they talk about the aviation, flights within the African continent. That is also good for economic integration. But what we have seen, given the experience with the regional blocks, is that the commitment to this is not there. Take the example of ECOWAS. ECOWAS has been in place since 1975. That's 43 years ago. As we speak, we are still grappling with the rudiments of economic integration. We are still at the level of free trade area, gradually moving into what we call the customs union.
So do you think the brilliant ideas, what a lot of people have termed brilliant ideas, brought in by the new AU chairman, Paul Kagame, is a tall order?
It's a tall order, and it's a bit ambitious, because I listened to part of the resolution or determination that he mentioned. He was talking about removing all tariff and non-tariff barriers within the continent.
The single market.
Yes, in 10 years.
Of infrastructure.
In 10 years, that's a tall order. Because you have to contend with problems of institutions, for instance. One of the biggest issues that we have on the continent, as far as trade is concerned, is the challenges with our institutions.
Do you think policies perhaps may pose a challenge?
Policy is also an issue. But the institutions are even bigger issues. If we take, for instance, the customs of all the countries in the various African countries, the immigration officials and all of that. If you talk to companies that export from this country, it's a nightmare. Moving from here to Benin, from Benin to Togo, to Cote d'Ivoire, to Accra, it's a nightmare. So all these issues are very critical to actually realizing the dream of economic integration. Of course, there's also the issue of transportation. There is no way you can integrate economically if you don't have the transportation infrastructure. It is easier to move goods from here to Europe, to China, to Asia, and the rest of it, than to move goods from here to West African countries.
Perhaps that's why he's promising a free movement of people on the continent.
He's promising it, but it's easier said than done. I mean, we have fantastic protocols at the regional level, at the continental level. How many of those protocols are being properly implemented? So it's a big issue. Bridging the gap between what is said and what happens in reality is a big issue for us in Africa.
Now, the talks of a continental free trade area in Africa are almost being concluded, and the Africa air transport market is coming into effect. So what really do all these mean in terms of economic significance?
Well, it is positive if it can be realized. It will bring the countries and the investors and operators of the economy on the African continent, to bring them closer together. It will make goods and investment and capital move freely together. It will also make it easy for people to move from one country to the other. And all these things are very critical for the promotion of trade. And trade has a way of also improving the development of the economies of the various countries in the continent. So it will impact positively on growth and development on the African continent if it can be implemented.
You keep saying
it's a big if.
It's a big if. So
yes.
What do you think African leaders should have been looking at realistically now?
Well, they should be looking at their institutions, because many of them have very weak institutions. They can be very tall in terms of promises, in terms of visions, in terms of dreams. But when it comes to implementing or realizing those dreams, they don't have the institutional capacity to make those things happen. So they should be committed more to building very solid institutions that can translate these dreams into reality. I think that is the most critical thing that I think the African leaders should be looking at.
Okay. There are a lot of claims that China is interfering. There was even a case reported by a French newspaper, Le Monde, that they actually bogged the headquarters of Ethiopia. Do you think this is the West way of bogging into African affairs? Trying to find out what we're doing on the continent?
I don't know the validity of that, but that is not a good way. But I know that China has very strong policy towards Africa. China has also been supporting a lot of infrastructure development in Africa. And China, I think, made a major contribution towards building the AU headquarters, even in Addis Ababa. So I don't know what they will stand to gain by bugging whatever it is in Addis Ababa.
Now, finally,
that is certainly not a good thing, if it is true.
Okay, finally, Mr. Muda Yusuf, before I let you go, there are also issues of this language barriers, the Anglophone and the Francophone countries, even in Africa, not coming together to agree because of their language differences. How do you think we can solve that?
These are some of the barriers that we need to break. We have issues of language barrier. We also have issues of currency. Yeah. All these things are very critical. And the way to go about it is actually to begin to teach some of these languages in the various African countries. Because languages are also very important to promote economic integration and economic cooperation.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Mr. Muda Yusuf. He is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Thank you very much.
In part 2, after the break, body of the former Vice President arrives in Enugu State for final funeral rites. Please stay with us for the details.